Andrew was a young, interesting, and attractive person from a fairly well-off family. Everything seemed destined to go well for him. His father owned a successful, growing company, had an excellent reputation, and overall, everything was just fine. You could even say it was splendid. However, Andrew didn't take his future seriously. He spent a lot of time partying, barely studied, and seemed to idle through life. He had many girlfriends, all different and constantly changing. Thus passed the life of a cheerful, not very responsible young man. There was, of course, a girl in his life who caught his special attention. He truly liked her. But she wasn't from a wealthy family, so he didn't engage with her for long, knowing that it wouldn't lead to anything good. He was very afraid of poverty and didn't want to give up his good, rich life. The thing is, he was used to constantly traveling to different cities and countries. For several summer months, he preferred to spend time at expensive resorts abroad. It was simply splendid. There was clear sea and even ocean, beautiful sand, and bright sunshine. In other words, he really relaxed there. It was just unclear why he relaxed so much, because he never really got tired. His parents had been eagerly awaiting the birth of their only son, and he was born after several years of waiting. That's why they constantly felt sorry for him, protected him. They didn't make him study or work, thinking he would do everything in this life. Especially since he had a company, and everything was going so well and confidently. But one day, everything seriously and abruptly changed in the young man's life. Something happened that no one in their family expected at all. Chris, the young man's father, was already quite mature. He had once loved his wife, Andrew's mother, very much. But over time, he noticed that his wife was changing quickly and wasn't as attractive anymore. And he was very rich, smart, and interesting. So he started thinking about finding a young and attractive girl who could brighten his years and maybe even have a son or daughter with him. At least, that's what Chris had been thinking and dreaming about for several years. He wanted to hold and raise a little, tender human being. And why not? He had something to offer to a little person and could raise them well. Of course, he loved Andrew very much, but his son didn't meet his expectations and didn't want to develop and bring significant and valuable benefits. With these thoughts, Chris had been living for the past few years. And one day he met a fairly young, attractive, and interesting girl. The meeting happened easily and quickly, seemingly completely by chance. Chris just stepped into a cafe to relax a bit, to clear his mind and decide how to plan his life further. And there came a sweet, free-spirited, interesting girl to him. "Hello, handsome man. May I join you for a cup of coffee?" softly and calmly asked Mia. "Hello, dear girl. Of course, I would be very glad for such pleasant and excellent company," calmly replied the man, feeling slightly cheered up. "Great, that's wonderful. I'm just a bit tired of the daily routine, and I would like to sit next to such a confident and attractive man." The girl started showering the silver-haired man with various compliments. "Miss, I understand everything perfectly. I'm also going through a difficult period in my life right now, although outwardly I seem very happy and wealthy." Chris began sharing his feelings with the practically unknown girl. That's how they started talking and quickly found common ground. The girl turned out to be very pleasant and surprisingly understanding and attractive. It seemed that Chris had accidentally met the perfect girl at first glance. Besides, she was so kind, sweet, and good-natured. After talking with Mia, Chris felt a very good and surprisingly light feeling and impression. Chris didn't really want to leave the young, attractive girl. Everything was going so well. But Mia acted like she was in a hurry, although she enjoyed talking to such a smart and attractive man. Of course, such a compliment pleased the man very much. But here's the problem. He didn't even ask for her phone number, although he was inclined towards positive and prolonged communication. After that evening, Chris's life definitely changed. He became more dreamy and romantic. He constantly floated in the clouds and allowed himself to smile for no reason and say pleasant words to everyone, although it wasn't like him at all. Before, he would just silently enter his office and work a lot with a rather serious face. But after meeting such a light and lovely girl, everything changed a bit. Even Chris's wife noticed that her beloved husband had changed slightly. She even joked once that it seemed like he had fallen in love. They laughed about it and then forgot. Chris started going to the same cafe regularly now. He hoped that he would meet that girl again, the one he had such a good conversation with. But he went for a whole week without any news. The girl didn't show up. There came a moment of slight disappointment. But one day, just when Chris had stopped hoping to meet Mia again, he finally saw her. She came as usual, lighthearted, romantic, and interesting. She exuded youth, freshness, and all those new modern thoughts. She was a true joy for Chris. And he suddenly realized that he had fallen in love with this girl he had dreamed about for so long. As soon as he noticed Mia, he quickly got up from the table and approached her, inviting her to sit next to him. He told her how much he had been waiting for her and how much he regretted not taking her phone number. The girl behaved sweetly and calmly. She didn't respond to his words, but continued to act in her usual gentle and romantic manner. It felt like she was just flirting in a feminine way and enticing the man who currently attracted her. Mia seemed a bit strange, or did she have some plan that no one suspected? On one hand, it seemed simple, but on the other hand, it was complicated. And from their second meeting, strong and warm feelings began to develop, quickly and simply turning into passionate feelings from both sides. Chris became so captivated by the young and attractive girl that he gradually started losing his head and immersing himself completely in these relationships, which became the true meaning of his life. Of course, he started taking care of her, including financially. First, he rented a wonderful, spacious, and even luxurious apartment for their meetings. He didn't hesitate to spend a large sum to ensure Mia's joy and happiness. That's how they started living and enjoying life together. At least, it suited Chris. He delighted and spoiled his woman, doing everything possible for her and providing for her. In return, she gave him her youth, attractiveness, and, of course, love in all its manifestations. At first, Judith didn't notice anything particularly unusual in Chris's behavior. Yes, he seemed to have changed. He became kinder and constantly smiled. Yes, she joked that maybe he had fallen for someone. But to seriously think and talk about her close person, with whom she had lived for decades, suddenly having another woman, Judith couldn't even imagine. To her, everything seemed calm and good. Judith was always occupied with something and passionate about things. She didn't feel jealous. She simply loved and cared for her husband sincerely. She wanted to continue growing with him, living together, and then peacefully enjoying their elder years. Perhaps they would travel more in the future. She dreamed that her man would finally have some more freedom at work, and they could relax. Despite her age and what seemed like significant life experience, Judith still believed in true love. Yes, she had heard many different stories from her friends. Sometimes, out of nowhere, men found a young and attractive lover and spent time with her. And women began to tolerate it because financial considerations held everyone tightly. But Judith thought that such a situation would never happen to them. Unfortunately, to her immense sorrow, it did. Moreover, over time, Chris started showing a slight, and then not so slight, vulnerability and indifference towards his loving wife who had supported him throughout his active youth. He had never cheated on Judith before. He had been a faithful and exemplary family man. Many of his peers of similar status and age had long ago changed several attractive mistresses, but he had remained faithful. However, Mia completely changed everything in the opposite direction. She transformed Chris into a different person. Chris didn't even recognize himself anymore. He became more obedient to his new woman, running after her and fulfilling various whims. And this wasn't even the whole story. Their relationship continued to develop rapidly and intensely. The thing was, once Mia realized that her man would do absolutely anything she wanted, she gradually and subtly began to manipulate him through pity in a very feminine manner. She started crying and complaining that so much time had passed and she was still just being kept. She claimed to have feelings and wanted to marry Chris. "How can this be, my dearest and beloved man? We've been together for so long, and you can't offer me anything. Do you think I'm with you just for these petty gestures? Are you aware that I want children and a real family with you?" she persistently and somewhat resentfully kept asking. "But you understand that I've been married to one woman for a long time, and Judith wouldn't take it well. I do love you very much and want children with you. But things shouldn't move so fast. Give me some time," the gray-haired man kept insisting. One day, though, Mia couldn't take it anymore and started strongly insisting that if Chris didn't marry her, she would simply walk out of his life. She made it clear that even his connections as a wealthy man wouldn't change her decision. Chris understood that Judith would be deeply hurt, but he had fallen so deeply in love with his new woman that he couldn't imagine life without her. Especially since she promised to soon bear him a wonderful and healthy baby. He couldn't resist this young, attractive, and romantic person. It was for this reason that he made the final and serious decision to divorce his wife and marry Mia soon. But he couldn't delay any longer. That very day, he came home and frankly admitted everything to Judith. She was truly shocked by everything unfolding. At first, she thought he was joking, that such a thing couldn't be happening. Is this a prank? How could this happen with her? But then Chris began to explain everything in detail. He said he wouldn't leave her with nothing. He would buy her a nice apartment, and everything would be fine for her, just without him. He insisted that she vacate the house as soon as possible, as it legally belonged only to him. Of course, everything he said to Judith that evening was not his true thoughts. He would never have acted like this before. He understood how much effort and energy his once beloved woman had put into building this home and beautiful garden. And now he was simply kicking her out and divorcing her. Judith suggested taking a break and thinking about whether the man was acting correctly and consciously at the moment. But he didn't want to hear or listen to anything. He knew he wouldn't argue with her, just act as Mia wanted. He gave her literally a week to gather all her things. What's even more interesting is that around the same time, his son arrives from abroad. And it turns out that he too is caught up in this period when his father starts evicting everyone for his current mistress. Chris says that Andrew also needs to leave this house as soon as possible. He will also buy him an apartment and provide money for the initial period. After that, Andrew will have to figure everything out and earn on his own. Andrew, like his mother, was simply astonished at how drastically their loved one had changed. Previously, he had been the one to take care of everything, ensuring they lacked nothing. Now he had turned into some kind of monster. He was so firm and indifferent to their decisions that it was unclear what was going on in his mind. All of Chris's actions, words, and deeds were constantly and actively controlled by Mia, who, as it turned out, only wanted one thing, to become Chris's legal wife as quickly as possible, settle everything regarding his property and finances, and become rich and happy with another young man. Mia was tired of waiting so long for things to change for the better, and now she had decided to take matters into her own hands and start acting. And so it happened. Chris was like in a fog. He acted according to Mia's instructions. Even when talking to his wife, he had notes in hand, prompts from his mistress on what to say and how to present information correctly. Judith, despite initially wanting to fight for her own happiness, eventually realized that it was futile now. Especially when, just a few years after such a serious and responsible conversation, she saw the very woman who had come to their home with suitcases full of various belongings and jewelry. She had managed to accumulate quite a lot over the years, as Chris had spoiled her greatly. Thus, everything quickly fell into place. Chris divorced, evicted his wife and son, and then married his new lover. At first, everything seemed fine, even perfect, but then everything changed. Mia's demands grew more and more insatiable. Chris constantly thought only about how to please his new, attractive, and most charming wife. It even reached the point where the company gradually started losing profit. While Chris used to refrain from such significant expenses, dedicating much time to studying and analyzing the situation, now he had completely lost control over it. Things were not going well. Chris's wife rushed to grab as much of Chris's wealth as possible before it was too late, and everything was indeed heading in that direction. As for Andrew, he simply had no other choice but to move into a small apartment that his father bought for him cheaply. His money quickly and easily started running out. And when he had spent all his remaining savings, and his father absolutely refused to give him anything more, Andrew had to sell his apartment and rent a small corner. He didn't want to work. It was just incomprehensible and completely unfamiliar to him. So everything went on its course. Eventually, he deteriorated to the point of becoming a real homeless person, quite literally. He started sleeping in different places wherever he could find shelter. His mother, Judith, genuinely suffered and worried for a while. She couldn't understand how he could treat the woman who had always protected and cared for him so cruelly. So much effort and energy had been invested in their life together, and now everything had been destroyed in an instant, leaving nothing behind. But after some time, she met a pleasant, mature man of about her age. He offered her to go abroad with him. It turned out he had a nice big house there for a whole family. He proposed to Judith to marry him and live a happy, almost heavenly life. At first, Judith hesitated for a long time. She didn't understand how she could suddenly change everything in her life like that. But then her friend began persuading her to accept the proposal. After all, it was a real opportunity to be happy, rather than constantly suffering for someone who didn't deserve it. Judith decided to agree. She stopped worrying about anyone else, gave her son the apartment, which Andrew also eventually squandered successfully. Judith's life turned out to be right and very good in this story. This woman truly deserved a good and dignified life through her kindness, understanding, and sincerity. As for Chris's life, it was simply terrible. His fortune was practically squandered too. Mia was already rubbing her hands in anticipation of acquiring all his remaining money, apartments, and houses. Then, quite unexpectedly to herself, she found out she was expecting a baby. At first, the attractive young woman didn't want to tell anyone anything. Moreover, she just wanted to get rid of it. But then she thought it over and decided that she wouldn't rush into it because, after all, she could get rid of the baby in the future. Mia wasn't as airy, soft, and kind-hearted on the inside as she appeared on the outside. In reality, she harbored a strong and somewhat dangerous monster within her. It was thanks to this child that she decided to actively start luring even more money and everything else possible from her old man. That's exactly how she called him behind his back. Now she became even more capricious, as her interesting condition allowed her to do various things, even not very pleasant and positive ones, under the pretext of expecting an heir. Chris understood and accommodated his beloved's behavior and new demands with sympathy. He was truly happy that soon he would become a father. It was something he had wanted for a long time. And then a real miracle happened. You could just see how lovingly and adoringly Chris looked at his wife now. He bought her everything she wanted. Money just flowed like water. He couldn't control himself. He felt that things in the company would definitely improve. It was just that kind of period. And a child, that's a new person who would bring him joy, and so on. So Chris, the man who had built a substantial company on his own, quite smart and calculating, began to act completely illogically. Of course, when Chris's closest friends started noticing that something was wrong with him, they began to constantly worry about him. They talked to him and tried to convince him that he was making a lot of mistakes at the moment, and he needed to constantly do something about it and change course. He shouldn't act so recklessly and destroy everything that had been built so painstakingly. But Chris didn't see or notice anything wrong in his actions. He thought he had become much younger, and now his whole life lay ahead of him, not behind him, and it was going to be the best time. It seemed like the man was gradually losing his mind. Then acquaintances attributed it to his deep love, saying he couldn't be persuaded to act differently. After numerous unsuccessful conversations, his close friends stopped communicating with Chris closely and frequently. And only Mia was completely satisfied in this situation. When the man complained to her that none of his friends understood him anymore, she simply held him close to her chest and said that the most important thing was that they had each other, and everything would be fine. But time passed, and money became very scarce. Everything was practically sold off. And then finally the girl gave birth. A simply stunning boy was born. It was a boy. He was so tiny, but so cute and pleasant. The birth went well, there were no complications. In short, now they would have to raise this baby in a rich and good home, enjoying their new family happiness. But it wasn't all so simple. Mia found out that her husband was bankrupt at that moment, so there was nothing left for him to take. Even the house where she lived was mortgaged. So she decided it was time to find herself someone else, someone convenient and as foolishly in love, but older. Well, that's life. Unfortunately, she didn't have to wait long. Chris actually had a weak heart, and he was well aware of this issue. Of course, when Judith was around, everything was fine. She strictly monitored Chris's timely medication and followed all the doctor's recommendations. But when she left, everything changed. Mia didn't want to do anything for her new husband. While she had heard him mention his heart problems, she didn't take it seriously or attach any importance to it. It wasn't something she needed. In fact, she didn't really need a strong and perfectly healthy, wealthy man at that moment. Unexpectedly, Chris had a seizure. At that time, Mia decided to go shopping with the nanny and the baby to choose the best and most valuable items for their child, and for herself as well. When they returned, they found Chris not breathing. The girl was shocked because she didn't expect Chris to pass away so suddenly. But then she regained her composure and quickly started figuring out what would happen with the inheritance and the money. Unfortunately, it was all in bad shape. It was mostly debts. To cover them, everything would have to be sold off and given to creditors. So the girl quickly packed all her things and simply left. She didn't want to say goodbye to him. She just left. She didn't want the child either. He was just a constant hindrance to her. That's why she acted horribly and cruelly, as even animals can't treat their offspring that way. She took him and threw him in the trash. More accurately, she placed him in the trash along with some documents that happened to be in the bag and some clothes, and rushed to catch a flight. She wanted to relax, enjoy life, and simply savor all the best emotions in this beautiful world. One day, a homeless man walked by the dumpster and saw a tiny baby crying. He also found his belongings nearby. He was very surprised. How could someone do this? When he unfolded the documents, he saw whose son it was. At first, he couldn't believe it. Tears welled up in his eyes. It turned out that this homeless man was Andrew, who had squandered everything and was now wandering different places in search of a decent place to sleep and food. And this dumpster was one of the large ones, practically elite for a certain category of people. And here, completely by chance, he found a living person who turned out to be his relative. Andrew didn't know what to do next. But he understood that the boy urgently needed to be saved at all costs. So he warmed him up a bit, fed him from a bottle that he had with him, and took care of him. He had grown so attached to the boy that he didn't want to give him away to anyone. But he knew it was illegal to keep him. So he took the little one to the hospital. He was very keen for the doctors to examine him carefully and check how healthy he was. They certainly didn't refuse him in the hospital. They examined the child. It was very good that everything turned out fine and everything was in order. The child needed to stay in the hospital for a few days because he had weakened during this time. It was necessary to observe. Then Andrew began to search for his father. It didn't take him long. He found out that his father had passed away completely unexpectedly for everyone. Then Andrew called Judith and told her everything in detail. Judith, of course, almost immediately went with her new husband. She understood that it was necessary to bid farewell to her former loved one properly. It was very good that Judith's new husband was understanding and simple. He understood how important it was to come and support his own son during this difficult time and to bid Chris farewell. It was important and simply had to be done. Otherwise, the conscience would definitely not be clear, and constant worry and depression would not allow them to live peacefully. And then the long-awaited meeting of the mother and her son happened, who had deteriorated so much and turned into an old, smelly man in this short period of time. At first, Judith couldn't even recognize him. "Hello, Mom. I'm so glad you came after all. I know for sure I can't do anything without you," the young man said when he saw Judith for the first time since their separation. "Hello, sir. I'm sorry, but you must be mistaken. I have only one son named Andrew, and he's completely different. Young, successful. So, I'm sorry, is there some mistake?" Judith said, a bit confused. "No, Mom, it's me, your son Andrew. Life has changed a lot for me during this time. I've become homeless. I have nothing left. I just threw it all away. This is how I look now," Andrew replied to his mother. With tears in her eyes, Judith constantly hugged her beloved and dear person. She no longer paid attention to his appearance. On one hand, it was difficult and painful for her to see what her son had become, but on the other hand, she was glad that he was alive and healthy, and that he was simply here, right now. Judith's husband also accepted and embraced her son. He was actually quite pleasant and hospitable. He was glad to finally meet the son of his beloved wife. Later, they had a pleasant family dinner. They rented a small apartment for a whole month to have time to settle all important matters during this period, bid farewell to their father and husband, and figure out how they would live and what to do next. In the evening, Andrew also told his mother in detail about how he accidentally found a little boy right on the street who turned out to be his true and close relative. When Andrew spoke about the small and fragile boy, tears started to well up in his beautiful eyes. He talked about how this was the best and most wonderful, such a marvelous boy in the world, that he was his little brother, and so on. For the first time in her life, Judith saw with her own eyes how deeply and sincerely her son was affected by another person, especially a little child. And then Judith began to think about how exactly to help and resolve everything. Indeed, Andrew himself very much wanted that little boy to always be by his side. But achieving this required a lot of effort. So, his mother and her new husband started helping Andrew. They began by finding him a very good and highly paid job, since he had always been interested in computers. He had a great understanding of programming, although he hadn't taken such a skill and interest seriously before. But now he realized that this was something that would definitely help him start a new life and provide not only for himself, but also for his child. He already fantasized and dreamed about raising this wonderful child. While bidding farewell to his father and dealing with work matters, Andrew unexpectedly met a charming girl at work. He liked her very much, and things quickly blossomed between them. They were attracted to each other by their best qualities. The thing was, Andrew was honest with his beloved. He told her directly that no matter what, he would definitely take the child who is currently his little brother. And he noted that if Kimmy didn't want to raise or live with a man who would have a child, then he couldn't build a relationship with her. It would just be a waste of time. Kimmy thought about it for a moment, but since she genuinely liked Andrew and also loved children, she accepted it as it was, as a fact. She even started helping the young man a little in his focused pursuit of the goal Andrew had set for himself. They managed to sort out the apartment situation too. Of course, they sold almost all of Chris's belongings. But it turned out he had a fairly beautiful and luxurious apartment in the very center of the city. He had even made a will for his beloved son Andrew long ago. So, he had already decided that he would definitely take care of his beloved son no matter what and would not leave him with nothing in the end. Plus, he had a good-class car. Suddenly, Andrew found himself a fortunate groom. He got an apartment, a car, and a good job. And within a few months, Andrew proposed to Kimmy. He wanted them to become a close-knit family. And it turned out well. Actually, everything was more or less wonderful in the newlyweds' life. Of course, the most anxious and important moment for them was when they received the child. Andrew worried and wondered how Kimmy would accept him. But Kimmy was so pleasantly surprised and happy that they had such a tiny and beautiful boy that she couldn't and didn't want to think about anything negative. She immediately accepted him as her own. She hugged the child and calmly hummed a tender and pleasant song to him. And under this beautiful song, the little one suddenly started to peacefully drift off to sleep. This was their first meeting with their new parents. Andrew and Kimmy would do everything in their power to make the child the happiest and ensure he had a wonderful life. Andrew's mother and her husband eventually returned abroad. But they eagerly awaited their family's visit and perhaps even permanent stay. And they awaited the wonderful little boy, whom they now saw as their grandson. They lived happily and well. There were, of course, minor disputes between Kimmy and Andrew. They were so small and insignificant that no one attached much importance to them. As for Mia, no one remembered her at all. She simply disappeared. But a few years later, news surfaced that a woman had been found in a dubious and questionable place, unable to survive. Perhaps she had again gotten involved with a new lover, and someone didn't like something. Or perhaps someone decided to take her and punish her for all the negativity she had brought into other people's lives. That's how the story of the young, attractive, but harsh and indifferent woman ended. It was a bit sad for her after all. She could have lived completely differently.